My friend Miguel is a music lover, an audiophile, and a physicist. Miguel has recently taken the replunge back into vinyl, buying an excellent SME 20-3 turntable with Dynavector XV1S cartridge, joined to his Vandenhall The Grail Phono Stage, AUDIO Angaku integrated amplifier, AVANTGARDE acoustic duo mezzo horn-loaded speakers, and a DCS Bartok DAC. Miguel has very specific and illuminating ideas about sound reproduction, including vinyl, which we discuss in this video shot at his New York City apartment. These views are from Miguel's 11th floor hacienda. You're a physicist, Miguel.
Yes.
I don't know many physicists who are into audio, much less into vinyl. I don't know a lot of physicists anyway. But I know you from interacting with you in our group chats. You have a very busy and active mind. Is it easy just to turn your mind off when you're listening? And not can you become not an analytical person in that environment?
Absolutely, yes.
How does being a physicist help you think, as an audiophile? What does it play? What role?
So, I mean, I have a tendency to try and understand why things work, why stuff happens, how this machine works, how the turntable works. I enjoy thinking about it and discovering new things, and I find it very interesting. Like I said in a video with Steve, actually, a lot of this stuff is motivated not by music, actually, but by the sort of curiosity, if you will, right? Like I got the single-ended amp, not so much because I did hear it, obviously. This is not something you buy on a whim, but I was also fascinated by the single-ended nature of it, right? With the SME, I listened to many turntables, and I found this SME to have, how shall I put it, like a propulsion and a sort of heft in the sound. It's hard to explain, but oftentimes I've heard vinyl systems that sound great, but are a little light in the foot, right? Like a little...
not much drive?
Yeah, but also the bass region is not as sort of powerful.
Digital often, generally speaking, seems to have more powerful bass sometimes.
Yes, and I think that's definitely true, right? So, for example, I have a bunch of DSD files, right? And the bass in a DSD file, and not obviously PCM files, is quite resolute. In fact, actually, when Mike Trey's birthday was here, John Atkinson was here, and we listened to some Nina Simone, and he pointed out that the DSD version had a much more taut and precise bass. Yeah.
Run down your rig for us.
Okay. So let's go from sources to speakers, right? Let's start with digital. This is a DCS Rossini DAC, streaming DAC. There's a DCS Rossini clock under it. I play Roon to this DAC directly over the network, not over USB, but over the network. So that's the digital rig. The analog rig is a SME 20/3 with an SME 5 arm, a Dynavector XV1S cartridge, and the phono preamp is this thing over here. It's a Vandenhall The Grail, which is a current mode phono preamp, right? What that means is that it's essentially it detects the current out of the cartridge rather than the voltage, right? And doesn't require any loading, for example.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, the loading that it presents to the cartridge is a short.
And what is that next to the Grail?
This is the power supply for the turntable.
What is the rack?
The rack is a solid tech rack of silence. There's something very important about this rack for my setup. First of all, I've filled the legs with sand, right? So that it's heavier and more damping, right? The second important thing is there is no wall in the rack, right?
There's no what?
Wall. There's no back or side. It's all open,
right?
So there is no resonance in the rack. But the most important thing is that the shelves, you can see they're screwed in, they can be moved up and down continuously, right? So that allowed me to maximize the space I have for the turntable so that I can put it here, which is frankly a not great spot, but given that the amp gets so hot, it's the only spot I have.
And tell us about the amplifier.
The amplifier is it's a Kondo Ongaku. It's an audio note Kondo Ongaku. It's a single-ended triode. It uses these transmitting tubes from the 40s. In fact, these very tubes are from 1944.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? You're listening to music through tubes that are 75 years old. Or
are those 6SN7s in the back or L7s? Or?
These are GZ39, I think they are. They are, or 5, I forget. They are rectifiers.
Right.
So this is a full wave rectifier, just the power.
Those are new old stock as well, I guess?
These are from 1955.
Do you think, I mean, I used to have tons of tubes, then I went broke and had to sell them all. Before tubes really went crazy, they used to be cheap. But what is it, from a listener and a physicist standpoint, that makes the old tubes so much better than like modern Czech or Russian tubes?
Nothing in particular, other than the fact that they were very skilled at making them, right? I don't think there's anything that couldn't be done today if you had the skills and the knowledge, right? But
so are Eastern Bloc tubes no better than old RCAs?
No, that's not true. But they definitely sound different.
I know all the 6SN7s, they all sounded totally different. Saldini, the tongue soul.
They sound different, but there's a reason, right? It's not a mystery, right? It's the materials they use to build them, how they build them, right? And so on and so forth, right? And a lot of that skill was soft and has been lost. It's hard to, you know. So, but having said that, you know, I have a couple pairs of the 1940 something 211s, but I've tried new tubes from PS Vane, I think it's called, and Shuguang or something like that, and they are okay. They're not as good as the Gs, but they're okay.
How did the original tubes that sound in there sound compared to those? How did the amp sound change?
These are not the original tubes that came with the amp, but the amp was designed around the G211.
Okay, and that's how many watts per channel?
It's rated at 27, but given the horns that I use, I probably don't use more than 1 or 2 watts.
And with this is an extremely expensive rig. Why did you decide over an integrated as compared to a separate pre and power?
There's a history to it, yeah. When I was a kid, I saw a review for this thing in stereophone, and I was so taken aback by the shape and the tubes and everything that I said to myself, you know, I want to have one of those one time.
Was your dad an audiophile?
No, my dad was not. He did love music though. He had this enormous Grundig, however you say it, console. And I was always, as a kid, I had this tiny little record player, and I loved the size and the warmth of the sound of his console. It was just gorgeous.
So that was in Argentina where you grew up?
Yes.
Where in Argentina?
Buenos Aires.
Wow. Such an incredibly rich culture, very musical.
Very musical, very cultured. Yeah. Like this thing is 27 watts with 5% THD. 5%.
That's a lot, isn't it?
That's a lot. Like, I would not want to listen to anything with 5% THD. But the thing is this, right? What does that mean, that distortion measurement? It means I put a full-size sine wave through this thing, right? And I measure the difference between the input and the output shapes of that sine wave, and I have some distortion, right? The shape gets bangled somehow, right? But music is not a sine wave at maximum. In fact, if you plot the density of music, most music occurs at low volume, right? So
what do you mean occurs at low volume?
So the sine
waveform?
The sine wave, what does it mean? If I were to plot, low volume to high volume, right? And I plot the input signal I'm using for THD, right? It's just a peak at the high volume because it's a sine wave at that level and that's it, right? But most music, if you listen to music, right, and you plot how much music there is, if you will, at low level versus high level, you'll see that it's much higher at low level. You have a lot more music at low level. That makes sense, right?
I guess.
Right. So what that means is that what really matters is the low-level distortion, not the high-level distortion. Right? In fact, I think somebody mentioned, I forget who it was, somebody mentioned that the original spec from whomever makes specs, right, was you need to measure distortion at many different levels, from very low to very high. Think of a very old, one of the first power amps with transistors, right? They had a lot of crossover distortion, right? What is that? That is basically that when you have a push-pull stage in a transistor amp, right? There is a threshold that you need to cross for the output device to actually output current, right? So what that means is that instead of having a straight line across zero with a low signal, right? You have something that looks like that, and you can hear it very well.
Huh.
Right? But if you measure that amp's distortion with the definition that people are using today, you have an enormous signal, and that little wrinkle, it becomes very tiny, and the distortion figure in that context could be great. And yet, this thing sounds like shit.
Sometimes it's hard to be a woman.
Well, it's interesting to me also that you're a physicist, you're a scientist, but you're not hung up on measurements. And there is definitely, in audio now, there's definitely a war being waged between trust your measurements, trust your ears.
Well, the question is, what are you measuring? If all that you're measuring is THD and frequency response, and those are the two things that you think define what you hear, it's wrong, right? The THD one is very simple, right? People measure THD with max input, right? With a sine wave. That's not music.
Nobody
right?
listens to max input.
Exactly. And so I am a physicist, and I believe that everything we hear can be measured because it's in the air that gets everything. The problem is we don't measure the right things. We frankly don't probably know exactly what to measure. They measure THD, they measure frequency response, they measure some impulse response, things of that sort, right? But maybe phase relations, right? How a low-level sine wave alters the phase of another low-level sine wave at a slightly different frequency, for example. I don't know. I mean, I'm just
right.
It can be very subtle. The ear is a very subtle device.
Right. Tell me about your speakers.
Okay. So my speakers, the reason I got the speakers originally was because as a physicist, I found them very, well, first of all, because for this amp, you need to have some horn speakers, right? It's very hard, especially with a room this size, right? I could drive, for example, a pair of the divorce you have, 096s with this amp, that would work very well, but it would not necessarily fill this room. I don't know, actually, I have never tried. But horns work very well with this, right? And so what I find interesting conceptually about the horn is that it's like an output transformer, but mechanical.
What's the name of these horns again?
AVANTGARDE Duo Mezzos.
Duo Mezzos. Are they Italian?
No, German.
Oh, German.
German, yes.
Continue, sorry.
Yeah, and so I find that very interesting.
What's your cabling?
Interconnects are all Kondo silver. The phono cable from the turntable to the tree is a crystal cable, and the speaker cables are also Kondo silver.
And symposium platforms.
Symposium platform was under the speakers, which was something absolutely revelatory. I got them because my neighbor in my previous apartment was complaining that my speakers were too loud.
Surprise!
Yeah, I was, and so I incorrectly thought that the platform would ameliorate the transmission, but in what it did is probably increase the transmission. So
Really?
So I had to move.
Wow.
What struck me the most is that the platforms changed the reproduction of piano notes the most. I was stunned. It was amazing.
How did they change?
The impact, you know, when the leading edge of the note, when the hammer hits the string, and the resonance, it was so much better with the bass, right? Which makes me think, frankly, that every speaker needs to have a proper bass, because it's a mechanical device at the end of the day, right?
Right.
It vibrates, and so, you know, how you sit the speaker on the floor is critical.
Oh yeah, placement is everything. What drivers are in these subwoofers?
There are two 12-inch drivers. They're powered, so there's an amp in the back.
And these are, we discussed this the other day, I believe I emailed you, these are exponential horns?
I think so. The shape of the horn, so the flare, right? So if you think of the throat of the horn where the speaker is, right? This curve, right? There are different designs. OMA, for example, uses a straight design for the horn shape, right?
Right.
AVANTGARDE and most others use either spherical or exponential. So that's the mathematical shape of the curve of the flare. Make sense?
You have top of the line, I mean, I know the big names and you have them, DCS, Bartok. Is it a Rossini?
This is a Rossini. It's a model up from the Bartok.
Doesn't get much better than that. Why did you want to get a vinyl rig, and what's been your experience, generally speaking, with the sound of your top-end vinyl rig to your top-end digital rig?
Right. So the digital sounds great. I didn't have a like feeling, okay, this doesn't sound good enough or anything like that. But I was intrigued, and I have like 600 records or something like that, right?
So what strikes you as the immediate differences that you hear?
So the first thing I will say is they are different. I don't want to say better or worse. They are different. They really sound different, right? And I would say, you know, they sound different in a way, not just this compared to that, but generally turntables, good turntables are in a sort of family of sound that is not all that different amongst themselves, but it's different from digital, right? So that's the first thing I will say. The second thing I will say is that there is something about vinyl that has a speed, an energy, a propulsion, right? That has nothing to do, in my limited experience, to sound quality, if you will. Obviously sound quality is great, but there's a reproduction, right, of music that has a pace, right, that few digital systems can reproduce, can match.
Does that equate to physicality as well, or is that something different?
I really don't know. I mean,
but you definitely think it has to do with pace.
It's the pace. It's the wholeness of the sound. There's a wholeness to the vinyl sound.
Sometimes it's hard to be a woman.